The night shift in Vanta Harbor megacity used to mean slow hours and tired eyes. Now it meant brightness that never blinked. In the Lightwell grid control bay, ceiling panels held a steady white that felt like noon. Coffee was still here, but it was a habit, not a rescue. Dr. Celine Merrick sat at the main console and watched the spectrum chart breathe. The curve rose and fell in gentle waves, not to mimic daylight, but to feed bodies. A soft chime marked each microcycle. The room smelled of warm plastic and disinfectant. No one yawned. A technician named Juno Ravel rolled his chair closer and tapped the live map. Sector 8 is holding stable, he said. Celine nodded. She had not slept in 30 hours. Yet her hands were steady. Her thoughts were sharp, too sharp, like the air after a storm. She turned her wrist and checked the skin sensor. The tiny patch glowed green, confirming uptake. Ansin was doing what it promised. Across the bay, a wall screen carried a hospital feed from Halcyon Medical Arc. Nurses moved fast, faces calm, hair tied back, eyes clear. A trauma unit that once fought drowsy mistakes now worked like a practiced dance. A man on a gurney smiled as if he had woken from a good dream, even though he had not slept. Post-operation recovery time is down again, Juno said, 12% from last month. Celine watched the numbers scroll. Heart rate variability, metabolic waste markers, neural clearance indicators. The system pushed tailored light into rooms, into street lamps, into transit hubs. It was not just energy. It was scheduling, chemistry, and restraint. A nurse on the feed leaned toward the camera and spoke to someone off-screen. Pulse is clean, she said. He is alert. He is asking for soup. Celine allowed herself a small exhale. She remembered the first trial volunteer, a factory worker who cried because he could stay awake with his daughter. Not forever, Celine had told him, just longer, and safer. The control bay doors slid open. Commander Idris Calder stepped in with 2 officers from Energy Security Command. He carried the posture of a man who slept in short bursts. Even now, his eyes moved across the room, measuring exits and blind spots. Dr. Merrick, he said, status. Celine stood. Lightwell grid is stable. Halcyon is stable. Uptake rates are within safe bands. Calder looked at the hospital feed. You are sure it is safe? Celine met his gaze. Safe is a range. We are inside it. He did not argue. He pointed at the spectrum chart. Then explained that. A thin orange line had appeared at the edge of the curve. Barely visible. Celine had seen it 10 minutes earlier and told herself it was sensor drift. Now it persisted. Juno frowned. It is not in the calibration model. Celine pulled up the raw data. Photon input at the street level was normal. Power draw was normal. Yet the measured output in Sector 8 had a small deficit. Like a leak that no one could find. Could be atmospheric absorption, Juno offered. Not tonight, Celine said. Humidity is low. Particulate load is low. Calder leaned closer. A leak means theft, or a fault. Celine zoomed in on the sector. It included a transit spine, a warehouse block, and the edge of Morrow data bastion. She checked the maintenance tickets. No lamp failures, no transformer alarms, no reported flicker. On the hospital feed, a corridor light pulsed once, so subtly that only a machine would notice. Celine replayed the frame and froze it. The pulse was out of phase with the microcycle. That is not scheduled, she said. Juno swallowed. It is like the light is being pulled. Calder straightened. Pulled by what? Celine did not answer. She had no answer that would be honest. She opened the diagnostic panel and ran the deep scan. The system responded with a clean bill in every module. Yet the orange line remained. Then a second line appeared. Blue, faint, forming a pattern that was not random. Celine stared at it until her eyes stung. This is not a hardware fault, she said. It is reacting. Something is reacting. Calder's jaw tightened. To our light. For a moment, the room went quiet except for fans. Nobody spoke. Every screen seemed to listen, waiting for a reply. Outside, beyond the bay walls, Vanta Harbor shone like a city that had decided night was obsolete. On Celine's screen, the deficit ticked upward by a fraction. The physics did not match the ledger. The light was going somewhere, and the grid could not say where. Calder kept his eyes on the orange line as it crept higher. "Lock the sector," he said. "Do not touch the cycle without my sign-off." Celine nodded, but her stomach stayed tight. The grid was a living schedule now. A careless change could hurt a million bodies. By sunrise the anomaly had not vanished. It had spread, thin and patient, along the transit spine. The lamps still shone, yet the output ledger bled. Celine logged every minute, waiting for something that would make it feel normal. She told herself she was fine. Her hands did not shake. Her mind did not drift. Still, when she blinked, she felt a second where sleep should have been. The lights filled it. That was the miracle, and maybe the first warning. 3 weeks later, Vanta Harbor barely used the word night. Factory boards showed rolling blocks of work and rest. People did not go home at 6. They went home when their light quota told them to. Cafeterias served soup at any hour, and the voices stayed low because no one was drowning in fatigue. Schools changed first. The Halcyon district opened classrooms in rotations. Children arrived under canopy lamps. Eyes bright, backpacks light. Parents signed new forms about exposure bands. Teachers learned the new warning sign. The blank stare that meant overload even when the body was awake. In the Cora Belt industrial zone, assembly lines never cooled. Robots had always worked without sleep. Now the humans matched them. Fueled by tailored spectrum, fewer mistakes, faster recovery, a city that felt sharpened. Then the arguments began. International Light Authority issued the first spectrum priority code. Hospitals came first, then water treatment, then food logistics. After that came defense sites. Then the rest of the city. The code went up on billboards beside public health warnings, as if ink could calm hunger. It did not. A factory owner swore that steel was survival. A surgeon swore that surgery could not wait for politics. A data center director swore that the grid needed servers awake to stay safe. Every sector believed it deserved a cleaner slice of noon. From the control bay, Celine watched the city turn into a spreadsheet with teeth. Requests stacked in the queue. Appeals became threats. Lawyers learned to talk about photons like property. Idris Calder returned one evening with a man in a plain jacket and a tired face. "Dr. Merrick," the man said. "Raphael Knox, Chief Strategist for International Light Authority." Celine offered her hand. His grip was dry and firm, like someone who had stopped trusting comforts. "I read your deep scans," Raphael said. "Your anomaly is not a glitch. It is a demand signal." Celine felt heat climb her neck. "A demand from what?" she asked. Raphael pointed at the spectrum plot and the missing wattage. "Whatever is taking it learns from our efficiency," he said. "The better you feed people, the easier you are to harvest." Celine looked to Calder, hoping for a correction. Calder did not blink. Raphael pulled up a map of Vanta Harbor. He tapped Sable District, where the code had cut bands to the minimum. Then he tapped Halcyon Medical Arc, still bright and protected. Between them sat the transit spine, glittering with ad towers. "Society is reorganizing around light," Raphael said. "That makes light a border. Borders invite war." Outside the bay, a protest filled the plaza. On the feed, Maya Mercer stood on a platform, voice rough and steady. "Light is not a luxury," she said. "It is public survival. Who decides who gets it?" Calder watched the feed. "You hear that?" he said to Celine. "It is not politics anymore. It is a trigger." An alert chimed. A substation door had been forced near Morrow Data Bastion. Security cameras showed a crew in dark coats with insulated cutters. They did not steal copper. They sprayed a matte coating across the lamp array. The lights dimmed in a neat rectangle. In that rectangle, Celine saw the deficit drop for the first time. Then it rose again somewhere else, as if angered. Raphael's voice stayed calm. "When the grid becomes a battlefield," he said, "your control bay becomes a front line." Calder lifted his comm. "Energy Security Command to Umbra teams," he said. "Deploy to substations. Protect the spectrum." The first Umbra team left the control bay within minutes. Their vans rolled into the city with blackout foam, spare filters, and portable lamp rigs. Celine stayed at her console. listening to the communications channel and watching the map fill with moving icons. A second alert chimed, sharper than the last. The deficit spike was no longer a thin line. It was a stair-step. Calder's voice came through, clipped and steady. Mark the origin. Give me a name. Celine zoomed the map. The red circle settled over Halcyon Medical Arc. Her throat tightened. That district was not just hospitals. It was the heart of the new schedule. Raphael Knox leaned over her shoulder. If it hits Halcyon, it will not stay local. He said, light is a dependency now. Take it away and you break people. The feed from Halcyon opened on Celine's screen. A corridor camera showed nurses pushing carts under a ceiling that still looked bright. Then the ceiling panels did something wrong. They held their color, but the glare went flat. Like paint. The nurses slowed. One of them lifted her hand and waved it through the air as if testing fog. A voice cracked over the hospital radio. We have power, but our lights are dead. Celine's fingers went cold. The grid still showed normal voltage and current. The lamps still reported that they were on. Yet the room on camera looked dim, even though it should have been white as noon. In the trauma ward, a surgeon paused mid-step. A monitor beside him blinked, then steadied. The patient on the table moved, eyes open, breathing fast. A nurse spoke, trying to sound calm. Stay with me. Look at my face. The overhead panels did not flicker. They simply failed to do what light was supposed to do. People could see, but only barely, as if their eyes were being starved. Outside the hospital, traffic lights kept their colors but lost their punch. Cars slowed at intersections, then stopped in knots. On the street, commuters raised their phones, using screens as lanterns. The crowd noise rose, not in panic yet, but in confusion that could tip at any second. At the control bay, Celine ran the emergency routine. She rerouted spectrum from billboards and street ads into Halcyon. She boosted intensity in the medical arc. The graph surged. The deficit surged with it. Juno Revell stared at the numbers. It is pulling harder, he said. It is matching us. Calder swore under his breath. Umbra team, you are up, he said. Secure Halcyon substation. Do not cut power unless I order it. The camera view jumped to a maintenance access tunnel. An Umbra officer ran with a helmet light that looked too weak for the job. The tunnel lamps were on, yet the air ahead stayed dark. The officer spoke into his microphone. This is Umbra 1. We have electricity. We do not have usable light. It is like the photons are not landing. Celine froze on that sentence. Not landing. She pulled raw spectrum from Halcyon sensors. The signal came back as if it had been filtered by a living membrane. Peaks were blunted. Bands were missing. The pattern was not random noise. Raphael watched her hands. That is a signature, he said. Not a failure. Not a theft of copper. Something is interacting with the spectrum itself. Celine zoomed deeper, down to microcycles. A response curve rose in the gaps. Faint but consistent, as if something had learned the timing of their feed and leaned into it. In Halcyon, the ward lights dimmed another shade. A patient tried to sit up and fell back. A doctor reached for a wall switch that did nothing. Someone cried out for a portable lamp. Across the feed, emergency vehicles arrived with strobes that should have cut through anything. Their lights flashed yet the street stayed muted, as if the color itself was being swallowed. Halcyon's generators hummed in the dark. Celine whispered, almost to herself, we built a food chain. Calder heard her anyway. His reply was flat, the tone of a man who did not like myths and did not need them. Doctor, stay on the science. I will handle the fight. Celine stared at the growing deficit, at the city blocks turning gray on the feed. If this could happen in Halcyon, it could happen anywhere. The world had turned light into life. And now life was being hunted in plain sight. The radios stayed busy after Halcyon went dim. Sirens cut through the streets. But the light from their strobes looked tired, like it could not finish a blink. Celine kept the hospital feed on one screen and the city map on another, watching response teams move like stitches across a wound. Calder moved between desks, collecting reports and giving short orders. Get portable rigs to Halcyon, he said. If people cannot see, they cannot move. He glanced at Celine. Can you push more output there? I can, Celine said, but the deficit will follow it. Raphael Knox watched the deficit curve and the spreading gray blocks on the map. We buy time with brightness, he said, and we pay for it later. Umbra teams reached the medical arc and set up field lamps along the ambulance bay. The rigs were meant for disaster zones, bright enough to turn night into day. For a moment, it worked. Nurses ran again, stretchers rolled, and traffic officers waved cars away from the entrance. Then the map changed. Ambulance crews stopped using overhead lights and switched to hand lamps. The queue of patients grew, and every face looked toward the ceiling, waiting quietly again. The new lamps did not fail. Their power draw was clean. Yet Celine saw the usable light drop, as if an invisible filter slid over Halcyon and tightened. Umbra 1, a field officer said, breath loud in his microphone. We're losing lumen. We're pushing full power and it keeps thinning. Juno Revell pulled up the optical sensor network. Camera nodes on poles and rooftops sent back grainy frames. And the frames began to smear. Edges doubled, color bands flickered, then broke into static. It is in the sensors too, Juno said. They are not dead, they are confused. Calder frowned. That takes away our eyes. It takes away your aim, Raphael said. Energy Security Command launched observation drones from a nearby depot. Celine saw their icons lift and sweep toward Halcyon. On the drone feed, the city was a tunnel of gray, with bright signs that looked washed out. The drone tried to lock onto a roadway flare, then drifted sideways. Navigation is slipping, the drone operator said. The optical reference points keep changing. A second drone lost altitude and clipped a billboard frame. It did not explode, it just fell, rotors still spinning, into an empty lane. The operator swore and cut the feed. Calder turned to Celine. Is this sabotage? Celine shook her head. No one is touching the machines. The power and the wiring are fine. She tapped the spectrum panel and brought up Halcyon in detail. Whatever is happening to the light itself. She opened the grid scheduler and compared the floodlight spectrum to the standard Ansin cycle. The emergency rigs used the same profile as the city lamps, tuned for maximum uptake. The deficit spike climbed almost in sync with that profile, as if it recognized the pattern and leaned into it. It is tracking our best settings, Celine said. A cold clarity settled in her chest. It is not breaking things. It is using what we designed. Calder did not like the implication, but he did not argue with the logic. Then change the settings, now. Celine hesitated. If she detuned the spectrum, the light might become less useful to whatever was pulling it. It might also become less useful to people whose bodies were already hooked to the cycle. If I shift the bands too far, some patients will crash, Celine said. Their nervous systems are riding the light. On the Halcyon feed, a patient in a hallway sank to the floor, eyes open, lips moving. A nurse knelt beside him and tried to keep him alert. Calder clenched his jaw. We cannot let the hospital go blind. Celine forced herself to decide. She opened a secure channel to the field rigs. Umbra 1, I am sending a new spectrum preset, she said. It will feel dimmer, but keep moving. Tell me if the thinning slows. Copy, the officer replied. Send it. Celine pushed the preset. The deficit dipped for 2 breaths. The corridor on the feed gained contrast. She almost believed it. Then the deficit snapped upward, higher than before. The corridor light went flat again, and the sensor frames stuttered, like a camera filming through heat haze. Juno stared at the curve. It adapted. Celine tasted metal in her mouth. Brightness had bought them minutes. The same brightness had taught the signature how to feed faster. And Halcyon was only the first lesson. Celine stayed in the control bay until the screens blurred. She had not slept, yet her mind kept running. The deficit curve climbed with a steady patience. Juno Revell cleared a corner table and turned it into a lab. He taped a portable spectrometer to a tripod and ran a fiber line into the grid console. If it learns from our best settings, he said, then we stop giving it a single meal. Calder looked over the setup with impatience. I need streets lit, not experiments. You need a target that exists, Celine said. Right now we are swinging at darkness with a flashlight. They built a test loop inside Morrow Data Bastion, using a maintenance corridor no one cared about. Umbra officers sealed both ends, and a medic waited outside with a lamp pack. The corridor lights stayed on, but the air inside felt wrong, like brightness could not settle. Celine loaded a bank of Spectrum presets. Some were harsh, some warm, some narrow as a blade. She turned them into short pulses, like knocks on a locked door. Juno synced a recorder to the sensor array and gave her a silent nod. She sent the first sequence. The sensors replied with noise, then with a dip that matched her pulse timing. She sent a second sequence with a small shift. The dip shifted too, keeping pace, as if something were tapping back through a wall. Juno's eyes widened. "That is not drift," he whispered. Celine tried a third pattern, splitting the pulse into two bands that alternated. The response did not just follow. It braided itself into the gaps, rising when she expected silence, falling when she expected output. The graph began to look like overlapping voices, each line holding its place. Celine felt the hair lift on her arms. "It is predicting," she said. Calder stepped closer. "Can it see us?" "It does not need eyes," Celine said. "It needs our schedule." She ran a longer sequence, a slow staircase of intensity that would have fed a ward for a minute. The drain pattern rose with it, then paused, then rose again with a delay too consistent to be chance. It was testing, like a predator pulling at a fence. A junior analyst broke in, voice sharp. "Doctor, you need to see this." A live broadcast filled the wall screen. Maya Mercer stood in front of a crowd in Sable District, the background lit by low emergency lamps. Her face was hard, and she held a tablet above her head like evidence. "They told you the grid was stable," she said. "They told you the dim zones were maintenance." Her voice rose as the crowd answered with shouts. "That is a lie. The light is being drained on purpose." Celine's stomach dropped. Maya did not name a cause. The phrase "on purpose" was enough to turn fear into blame. The broadcast cut to footage of people pressing around a light authority truck. Someone threw a rock. Another person reached for the lamp crates. The camera shook as officers pushed back. Calder's hand went to his comm. "Pull that feed," he said. Raphael Knox appeared at the bay entrance. He watched the riot footage for one beat, then looked at Celine's braided graphs. "You are teaching it," he said, "and she is teaching the city." Celine did not look away from the sensor response. "If the public panics, we lose the grid," she said. Raphael's voice stayed flat. "We were going to lose it anyway. Information is a weapon. Silence is one too." Outside, new alerts stacked on Celine's map. On a side channel, Celine saw a message from her brother, Evan Roan. "Street lamps out. People fainting. Please answer." She typed a reply, then deleted it. There was nothing honest to send in the dark tonight. Substations in 3 districts reported forced entries. Not theft, just people trying to get brighter lamps, better bands, any edge. The city was starting to fight itself for photons. In the corridor test loop, Celine sent one last pulse. A gentle curve meant to calm a nervous system. The drain pattern answered with a smooth counter curve. Almost elegant. It was not random hunger. It was behavior. Celine leaned back, breath shallow. "It is here," she said, "and it is listening?" Calder stared at the map as if it had betrayed him. "Then we are not policing a blackout," he said. "We are at war." Raphael Knox did not wait for the next alert. He stood at the map wall, eyes fixed on the spreading drain signatures. In 3 districts, the curve had begun to echo the same braid Celine saw in the test loop. "We are feeding it," Raphael said, "and the city is feeding itself into panic." Calder folded his arms. "So what is your answer?" Raphael pointed at the Lightwell grid scheduler. "We starve the pattern. We cut the rich bands. We drop to survival light only." Celine felt her pulse jump. "If we do that, people will crash," she said. "Not everyone, but enough." Raphael looked at her, not unkind, not soft. "Enough will die if we do nothing." Calder stared at the hospital feeds. Halcyon still worked, but the corridors looked bruised. "If we dim the city, we invite riots," he said. "We already have riots," Raphael replied. Now we choose where they happen. The order went out as a protocol update. Cold and simple, Lightwell grid shifted into dusk quota, reducing spectrum richness across Vanta Harbor. Street lamps kept their glow, but the supportive bands thinned, like nutrition drained from a meal. For the first minute, Celine saw a miracle. The drain curve dipped, the braided response lost its edge, as if it could not find purchase. Then the city answered. In Sable District, people slowed on sidewalks and gripped railings. A man at a bus stop sank to his knees, eyes wide, mouth working for words. Two strangers tried to lift him and realized their own arms felt heavy. A delivery truck rolled through an intersection and did not stop. Its driver blinked hard, head lolling, and the truck clipped a median with a grinding scream. Cars piled behind it, horns weak in the muted light. Halcyon Medical Arc took the hit next. Patients who had been calm grew restless. Then blank. Nurses moved faster, but their own focus frayed. A triage doctor snapped at a resident, then caught herself and swallowed, as if ashamed of her own voice. Celine watched and felt her hands go numb. This was the hidden bill of Ansin, paid in real time. Her phone buzzed. Evan's name flashed. Sis. The street went soft. I can't keep my eyes open. What is happening? Celine closed her fist and did not answer. Calder slammed his palm on the console. Reverse it, he said. Raphael did not flinch. Hold it, he said. You wanted proof it was a dependency. You have it. Celine turned to Raphael. How many minutes? She asked. How long before we are killing people on purpose? Raphael's eyes stayed on the drain curve. Long enough to see if it retreats. He said. Outside, Maya Mercer's feed returned, shaky and close. People crowded around a portable lamp crate, shouting, hands grabbing. An officer raised a baton and hesitated, as if the light made the decision heavier. This is what they do, Maya said into her microphone. They turn your bodies into hostages. Calder stared at the screen. She is going to ignite the whole city, he said. Raphael spoke without looking away. Then we fence the fire. He issued a second order. Energy Security Command would establish cordons around substations, lamp depots, and spectrum control nodes. Umbra teams moved to the perimeter with blackout foam and filters, not to make darkness, but to control where brightness existed. Celine heard the words and understood the shift. Light was no longer a public service. It was a ration. On the map, blue rings formed around key nodes. In the streets, armored vans took positions. A loudspeaker message began to loop, instructing citizens to stay within assigned corridors, to avoid unauthorized lighting, to accept the new bans. Calder lowered his voice. You are declaring martial law. Raphael finally looked at him. No, he replied. The grid declared it. I am only writing it down. Celine watched the drain curve again. It had not vanished. It had changed, spreading thinner, searching for the last rich pockets of spectrum. The city had tried to starve the signature. Now the signature was hunting for whatever remained. After the cordons went up, the city learned a new kind of fatigue. People did not yawn. They simply slowed, as if their thoughts had gained weight. In the corridors Raphael called survival light. Faces looked awake but hollow. Celine walked through Morrow Data Bastion with a tablet pressed to her chest. The grid map refreshed every few seconds, and every refresh felt like blame. The drain pattern had thinned and scattered, testing the last rich pockets with patient pressure. 2 days into rationing, the city kept moving, but conversations clipped and eyes darted at shadows that were not there for long anymore. Juno Revell met her near a stairwell, eyes red from screens. The clinics are reporting new symptoms, he said, not just fainting. He led her into a converted briefing room. Cots lined one wall. People lay still with eyes open, hands twitching. Dr. Priya Iwane stood at the center table, sleeves rolled up. She was the neurologist Halcyon sent when ward protocols began to fail. Dr. Merrick, Priya said, I asked for you. Celine stepped closer. Tell me what you are seeing. Priya tapped a chart. They are awake, but their emotional control is slipping. The light keeps the body running. It does not guarantee the mind stays coherent. A man on a cot began to sob without sound. Priya lowered her voice. Some misread tone. Some lose empathy. Some hear fragments of speech when no one is speaking. It is not magic. It is the brain trying to steal rest from cracks. Celine swallowed. We replaced sleep with a cycle. You replaced a biological rhythm with a policy. Priya replied. Then the policy changed every day. Juno leaned in. We can stabilize a baseline. A simpler schedule. A baseline helps, Priya said. It does not restore what they have lost. They need real sleep or real darkness, even in short blocks. Celine felt her chest tighten. Darkness was now treated like a threat, and she had helped create that rule. A secure call cut in. Calder's voice sounded hard, but strained. We have another breach at a lamp depot, he said. If they reach the spectrum crates, we lose control. Celine glanced at the map. The depot sat inside Sable District. Hold your line, she said. I will stay on the grid. She ended the call and turned back to Priya. How many are like this? Hundreds already, Priya said. Thousands soon, if the bands keep swinging. Celine's tablet buzzed with a personal alert. Evan Roan. A location tag. Lights wrong. Seeing someone in the hall. Please come. Celine moved before she finished reading. She left the room at a run. Juno chased her. My brother, Celine said. They reached the residential wing for essential staff families. The door camera showed Evan barefoot in the hallway. Eyes wide, one hand pressed to the wall panel where his skin sensor patch should have been. Celine opened the door. The ceiling light was on. Yet it felt thin, like warmth without food. Evan? She said. He turned toward her too fast and pointed down the hallway. Do you see him? Celine followed his finger. The hall was empty. There is no one there, she said. Evan shook his head, jaw trembling. He keeps calling my name. He sounds like you. Why is he doing that? Celine moved closer and saw the patch on Evan's wrist. The adhesive had peeled back. Under it, the sensor lens was scratched, and the indicator blinked a color she had never coded. Juno frowned. That is not a light authority patch. Where did you get it? A guy in Sable sold it, Evan said. He said it would make the dim hours easier. Celine felt anger rise, sharp and useless. People were hacking their own bodies to survive the ration. She peeled the patch away. Evan flinched and grabbed her sleeve. If you take it off, I will crash, he said. I have to stay awake. I have to. Celine looked at the map again. The depot breach was escalating. Calder would have to fire, retreat, or cut the zone darker. In front of her, Evan swayed, fighting for coherence the city had promised him. Celine felt the trap close. Save one person, and weaken a perimeter. Hold the perimeter, and let her brother fall. She made a choice that tasted like betrayal. Juno, route a steady band to this wing, she said. Not rich, just stable. Juno hesitated. That will steal from the depot ring. I know, Celine said. Do it. Juno executed the reroute. On the map, one small pocket brightened. At the same time, the depot perimeter dimmed a shade. Evan's shoulders dropped as if a weight fell off him. He blinked, then stared at Celine with a tired, honest fear. Celine, he whispered, what did we do? Celine held his face between her hands. She wanted to promise a fix. Instead, she listened to distant sirens and the quiet tick of the drain pattern searching for the next rich pocket. And she understood that every rescue would carve a new wound somewhere else. Not long after that choice, the Light Authority escalated to orbital containment. Noctis Coast was the only remaining lever that could stabilize the grid. Noctis Array floated at the edge of dawn, a line of mirror satellites holding sunlight for a hemisphere that could no longer sleep. Celine arrived at the command module and felt the hum through her boots. The control deck glowed with half-strength panels. Outside, the mirrors shimmered like patient eyes. Raphael stood by the main console, speaking to Calder through a narrow band link. Ground sectors are blind again, Calder said. They need the mirrors stable. Raphael answered quietly. They will have stability when I know what we are fighting. Juno was already at the spectral table, fingers tracing data streams from the outer mirrors. The drain pattern has changed, he said. It is not feeding evenly anymore. It is clustering around the pivot mirrors, the ones with direct line to the industrial station. Celine leaned closer. The display showed energy flow through the array, a heartbeat of light pulsing through hundreds of nodes. Some nodes began to fade like cooling embers. It knows where the throughput is richest, Celine said. It is moving toward the conversion plant. Raphael looked at her. Then we fight it there. Below orbit, the industrial complex on the Noctis coast flickered between night and blinding white. The plant ran mirrors on the ground and beams in the air, folding sunlight into the city grid. Umbra squadrons were positioned along the shoreline, each with reflector drones and blackout shrouds. Calder's voice came through the interlink. Engaging defensive burst protocol. 5-second burst pattern. The shoreline lit in measured flashes, like heartbeat thunder. Between each pulse, the world went dark. Celine watched the telemetry. The burst bands are holding. Radiation stable. Reflection loss minimal. Juno frowned. For now. The next set of data came faster. The drain curve twitched, then began to sync with the pulse rhythm. It was adapting to the 5-second cycle, like a swimmer matching waves. Shift to 3 seconds, Raphael ordered. Calder complied. The coast flickered again, faster, disorienting even through the cameras. Juno's screen showed the pattern shifting with it. Less delay, more precision. It is not resisting, Juno said. It is rehearsing. In the conversion plant, one of the mirror cores overloaded. The beam cut upward and scattered into fragments of light. A drone bank veered to intercept, but their optical sensors glitched. Half of them crashed into the sea, one by one. Calder cursed over the link. Losing visual lock, switching to radar. Radar will not help, Celine said. It reads through reflection. The pattern is not mass. It is behavior. Another flare bloomed on the horizon. A mirror tower collapsing inward, its panels glowing white-hot before going black. Raphael spoke to Celine without looking at her. If we cannot hold the array, we shut it down remotely. Celine froze. Shut down the primary source? That is half the continent's light. It is better than feeding an enemy we cannot see. Celine glanced at Juno. We can decouple the local mirrors. Isolate the infected nodes. Give me time. You have 4 minutes, Raphael said. Celine's fingers flew across the console. She rerouted power, tried to create gaps in the spectrum, artificial dark lanes that would confuse the drain pattern. For a moment, the data stabilized. Then a new anomaly blinked on the far side of the array. Not drain, but reflection. The mirrors themselves were sending light back at irregular intervals, as if something behind them had learned to mimic the control signal. It is echoing us, Juno said. It is learning the command syntax. Raphael stepped to the control override. Then it is too late. Celine reached for his wrist. Wait. He keyed in the emergency shutdown. On the screens, the array dimmed segment by segment, each mirror folding its surface like an eyelid closing. The beams cut off, the plant cooled, and the coastline sank into natural night for the first time in months. For 10 seconds, there was silence. Then a flash appeared in orbit. Faint, deliberate, shaped. The surviving mirrors reflected one last burst. Uncontrolled, downward, it struck the coast and lit up every remaining tower in a sheet of white that lasted a single breath. Communications cut out. The entire Noctis sector went dark. Calder's voice came back, ragged. Station offline. All nodes unresponsive. Juno looked at the graphs. The drain pattern vanished completely. Raphael exhaled. We bought silence. Celine stared at the blacked-out display. No, she said softly. We just taught it what silence means. The words barely left her mouth before the city answered. Across Vanta Harbor, the grid dropped into emergency conservation to cover the loss of Noctis array. Panels stayed on, but the supportive bands thinned to a bare glow. Halcyon Medical Arc went first. On Celine's screen, nurses worked by hand lamps. A ventilator alarm flickered and steadied. A surgeon blinked too long and had to brace on the wall. The ward did not fail like a machine. It failed like a rhythm breaking. Priya Iwane came on the channel. Voice tight. We are losing staff focus. Patients are slipping. Can you send spectrum packs? Celine glanced at the allocation board. The packs were tagged for water treatment and transit control. She hated the list, because every line meant someone else. Then transport snapped. A commuter train overshot its stop. Doors opened into a crowd that was not ready. People stumbled, argued, then fell quiet when their legs stopped cooperating. Traffic lights held their colors, but drivers misjudged distance and clipped curbs. Minutes later, the river pumps reported trouble. The plant's optical monitors lost reliable contrast. Operators switched to manual, but the new labor schedule had left them short-staffed. Pressure dropped across 3 districts. Apartment taps coughed air. Calder's voice cut in. Umbra teams to Lamp Depot 12. Do not let the crowd breach the crates. Celine opened the depot feed and felt her throat tighten. Citizens pressed against a fence. Faces pale in low light. Someone shouted that their grandmother was fading. Someone else screamed that the authority was hoarding noon. The fence bent, then snapped. Hands surged toward the crates like they were food. Maya Mercer was there, broadcasting, her camera shaking. This is what rationing does, she said. It turns neighbors into predators. Juno Revelle stood beside Celine, knuckles white. If they grab those presets, they will burn themselves. Celine watched the spectral telemetry from the depot lamps. The drain pattern pulsed in small, eager steps, clustering where the richest crates were stacked. It was not smashing the depot. It was waiting for humans to open it. Raphael Knox leaned over the console. Do you see it? Celine swallowed. It feeds where we concentrate light. Raphael's voice stayed flat, then stopped concentrating it. He pushed a new directive to the global scheduler. Long dark protocol. Whole districts would go to minimal light for days. Hospitals would run on narrow bands. The rest of the city would be told to endure darkness and real sleep again. Calder hissed. You cannot order that. Raphael did not look at him. I can. If I do not, it will choose for us. Celine's personal channel chimed. Evan Roan's name flashed from the staff wing. She tried to call. No answer. She ran, boots loud in the corridor, passing cots and quiet faces that stared too long. The building lights dimmed another shade as the protocol rolled through. Evan lay on the floor outside his door, one hand curled under his cheek. His eyes were open, but unfocused. Evan? Celine knelt and touched his shoulder. Can you hear me? His lips moved. It went quiet. He whispered, I can't find the light. Priya arrived behind her with a medic pack. She checked Evan's pulse, then looked up once, warning already in her face. Celine shook her head. No, we stabilized his band. We stabilized it for a minute. Priya replied. Then the grid cut it. Celine's breath caught. She saw the depot, Halcyon, the pumps, and Raphael's directive. Every rescue pulled a thread from somewhere else. Evan's chest rose twice, then stalled. On the tablet, the drain curve still did not disappear. It slid toward the depot ring, intent, as if it smelled fear through data. Celine held his hand and felt it cool. Down on the street, loudspeakers began to loop the new order. Citizens were told to stay inside, to accept darkness, to sleep. Celine looked at Evan's face and understood the worst truth. Whatever hunted their light was not cruel. It was simply alive in a spectrum humans had turned into food. Outside, Vanta Harbor dimmed by design, and the cost finally had a name. The city had been quiet for 2 nights. The kind of quiet that came with sleep returning. Windows went dark in whole blocks. Not because power failed, but because people finally let their eyes close. The streets still felt tense, but the constant edge had softened. Celine kept Evan's wrist patch in a sealed bag on her desk. She did not open it again. She only stared at the scratched lens and remembered how quickly a promise became a trap. Raphael called a working session inside a dim conference room at Morrow Data Bastion. One lamp panel hung above the table, set to the lowest band that still allowed clear faces. Maya Mercer arrived with a scarf pulled high, eyes red but steady. Juno spread graphs across the wall display. The drain pattern still shows up, he said. It just moves slower when we cut the rich bands. Celine placed a small projector on the table and pushed her chart into view. "We're thinking in extremes," she said. "Full nutrition or starvation. We need a middle the city can survive." Raphael leaned back. "You mean turning the lights back on?" "No," Celine replied. "I mean poor light. A spectrum that keeps basic function but does not feed the pattern." Maya looked between them. "Can people live on that?" "They can," Celine said. "It will feel dull. Recovery will be slower. Work will be limited. But they will not collapse. And the pattern will not spike." Raphael's gaze stayed hard. "Dull light means weak defense. Our drones cannot trust optical references. If we lower output further, we invite raids and sabotage." Maya set both hands on the table. "You already have raids. You have hungry crowds and dead neighbors. If we keep people on starvation bans, they will tear the grid apart." Raphael did not raise his voice. "If we lose control of the grid, we lose everything." Celine met his eyes and kept her voice level. "Control is not the same as safety. Give me one district to test. If it fails, I will stop." The lamp above them hummed softly, and Celine realized she could hear her own breathing again. Raphael tapped his tablet once. One district, no critical infrastructure. They chose Pineglass Ward, a strip of apartments and small clinics near the river. Celine wrote a spectrum recipe that cut the richest bands and kept a narrow range that supported alertness without pushing the nervous system into overdrive. Juno embedded it into a pulse rhythm designed to leave tiny gaps, like sips instead of a meal. Priya Iwane joined the feed from Halcyon and listened without interrupting. When Celine finished, Priya nodded once. "Add a dark window. Hours, not minutes." Celine added the window. At local dusk, Pineglass shifted to the new band. Street lamps stayed on, but their glare softened. Inside apartments, people did not rush to find black market patches. They sat on couches and blinked, surprised by the absence of pressure. A clinic camera showed a nurse yawning for the first time in weeks. She laughed at herself, then covered her mouth like it was rude. The drain pattern did not vanish. It hovered at the edge of the district. Probing, Celine watched for the familiar surge and did not see it. The curve rose, then flattened, as if the pattern tasted the poor light and moved on. Maya whispered, "It works." Raphael stared at the stable line. "For now, if it learns this flavor, we lose it." Celine imagined Evan sleeping without a sensor patch. His face finally slack. The thought steadied her. This band was not victory, only breathing space. Then a separate alert lit up on her map. Not a drain spike, but a policy request from a private provider. Someone had noticed the new recipe and asked for an exemption to run richer bands behind closed gates. Celine did not tell Maya yet. She only watched the request sit in the queue, waiting like a hand reaching for profit. The exemption request did not stay quiet for long. By morning, rumors moved faster than patrol vans, and people whispered that one district still felt like the old daylight. They called it Orem Heights, and for those left in thin bands, the name already sounded like an insult. Celine pulled a live feed from the ridge and saw it with her own eyes. Behind private gates, street lamps burned warmer and fuller, and the sidewalks looked calm in a way the rest of Vanta Harbor no longer could afford. Outside the gates, the city lived on poor light and careful breathing. Maya Mercer arrived with a clip on her tablet, filmed by a courier who had climbed a fence for a better look. The camera caught a polished sign that read, "Premium Life Spectrum, Authorized Access," with a clean logo underneath that did not belong to the Light Authority. Maya did not need to raise her voice for the room to feel the heat of it. Raphael Knox read the logo once and his expression hardened. Lumen Gate. Celine opened the Spectrum ledger and traced the draw in silence. Orem Heights was pulling rich bands through a private relay hidden inside the commercial distribution network. Masked as medical support to ride on emergency priority. Juno Revell followed the route on a second screen and whistled through his teeth when he saw how neatly it had been disguised. "They are piggybacking on our priority rules," Juno said. "They bought a disguise." Outside, the city reacted like a wound touched raw. Crowds pressed around lamp depots, shouting for better presets, some begging for their parents and children, others accusing the authority of hoarding light. The anger was not abstract anymore, because someone had proven there was still comfort to sell. Maya looked at Raphael without flinching. You rationed pain, and they sold relief. Raphael did not argue with her framing, but his voice stayed controlled. We seize the relay. No shots unless there is no choice. Celine caught his sleeve before he could turn away. If you cut it cold, people will stampede. Let me expose the flow first. Raphael met her gaze and waited. He had been the one who issued orders and carried consequences. But now he let her set the first step because he knew her step might save lives. Celine pushed a routing map onto the wall screen and built a public-facing dashboard. It showed every bright band moving from public depots toward the private gates. And every thin band left behind, with timestamps that could not be argued away. Maya started recording before Celine even finished. Send it, Maya said. I will carry it. Celine published the trace, and within minutes Maya's broadcast carried the map across Vanta Harbor. On street cameras, people stopped pounding depot doors and turned their attention toward the ridge, shouting a different set of names. The anger became aimed, and that made it both safer and more dangerous. Raphael and Celine moved with an Umbra squad to the relay site, a warehouse labeled medical storage that sat close enough to downtown to draw a crowd fast. Raphael ordered the doors kept open for cameras. Inside, lamp crates gleamed with rich presets, and a technician froze when he saw uniforms in the aisle. Raphael kept his voice low and even. Step back, hands where I can see them. The technician swallowed and tried to sound certain. We have permits. This is legal. Celine went straight to the control rack and found the contract header glowing on the screen. A city seal sat beside the lumen gate mark, clean as a signature. Through the wall she heard shouting from the street, and she knew that if the lights dropped hard, the crowd would surge and someone would get crushed. Raphael leaned in, eyes on the output. Cut the feed. Celine shook her head once, then changed one line in the profile instead of pulling the plug. She swapped the rich bands for her poor light recipe, not turning anything off, only taking away the profit while keeping bodies from crashing. The output softened, and on Celine's tablet the drain pattern did not spike. It hovered for a moment, then drifted away, uninterested in a meal that could not sustain it. Raphael watched her hands and understood what she had done. You did not shut it down. I took away the leverage, Celine replied, and I kept people alive. Outside, the shouting lost its sharp edge as Orem Heights dimmed to the same band as everyone else. The crowd did not cheer, but it stopped pushing forward, because the injustice had been removed in front of their eyes instead of hidden behind an excuse. Maya waited at the exit with her camera lowered for once, her expression grim with relief. You two just made an enemy. Lumen Gate will not forgive this. Raphael looked past her to the dim streets and the patrol rings that were barely holding. Then we stop fighting each other, and we find a boundary with the thing that feeds. Celine felt the weight of his words settle, not as romance, but as a kind of trust built under fire. They had reclaimed one node, and they had proved poor light could be enforced without turning the city into a slaughterhouse. Now the next step was harder, because it meant learning how to speak to a system that did not care about human pride. Celine returned to the lab corner Juno had built, but he had stripped it down further. One lamp panel hung over the table, tuned to a single narrow band, and the rest of the room stayed in a deliberate gray. The air felt cooler without the bright cycles, and Celine realized she could finally hear the building's ventilation again. Juno held up a small controller with pulse timing marked in plain words. If we keep it simple, it stops learning from our complexity. Simple might be the only language left. Celine sat and watched the live drain plot on her tablet. Under poor light enforcement, the signature had thinned, but it had not left the city. It wandered at the edges of districts like an animal that learned where fences are. Raphael Knox arrived with 2 Umbra officers and dismissed them at the door. He kept his posture steady, but Celine noticed he looked older in dim light, like the bright cycles had been hiding exhaustion from everyone. Maya Mercer came last, carrying a small field recorder instead of a camera. No speeches, not tonight. Celine nodded and pushed a new pulse sequence to the lamp panel. The band stayed narrow, But the rhythm shifted in a slow pattern, gentle enough that it would not jolt a human nervous system. On the plot, the signature drifted closer, and the line trembled as if it had felt a knock. Juno leaned in. It is responding, not eating, not fleeing. Celine adjusted the timing by a small fraction and watched the response settle. The signature did not spike like it did during rescues, and it did not vanish like it did under deep darkness. Instead, it held position and began to mirror the rhythm with a lag that grew smaller over time. Like a choir learning to match a conductor. Raphael's voice was low. So you can lure it. I can invite it to a boundary. Celine said, if I push harder, it will feed. If I starve it, it will hunt. Maya watched the plot as if it were a heartbeat on a hospital screen. What is it trying to say? Celine did not answer with a theory. She answered with behavior. She sent a pulse that represented abundance, then pulled it back to the poor band. The signature rose toward the abundance, then stabilized at the boundary instead of lunging, as if it preferred a steady flow over a feast that might be cut. Juno whispered, it wants continuity. Celine tried a different message. A long silence followed by a sharp pulse. The signature recoiled from the sharp pulse, then returned when the rhythm softened, suggesting a preference for smooth balance over violent change. The plot looked less like a drain and more like a negotiation between two systems that had learned each other's pressure points. Raphael folded his arms. Balance helps it. If we give it a steady ration, we normalize an invader. Maya did not flinch. If we do not, we normalize funerals. Celine felt Evan's absence like a physical weight, and that grief made her careful. She could not afford to turn this into a fight of slogans. She pushed one more sequence. A slow rise that stopped just before the signature would spike, then held. The response formed a plateau, stable and almost calm. It is not asking to erase us, Celine said. It is asking for a long-term photon budget. Raphael's eyes narrowed. And if we refuse? Celine looked at the darkened room, then at the city map on her tablet. Then we can try to win by force. We cut deeper, longer, until millions go through withdrawal and collapse. And maybe it starves. Maya's voice turned quiet. And the other option? Celine let the words come slowly, because she knew they would change everything. We cap light everywhere. We accept limits, keep people alive, keep it fed just enough to stop hunting, and live with a ceiling we do not control. Raphael stared at the stable plateau on the screen, and Celine could see the calculation behind his stillness. He was weighing enemy doctrine against human bodies, and for the first time he had no clean move. Juno broke the silence with a single sentence that sounded like a verdict. It is a boundary that holds, and anything that holds can be built on. Celine watched the signature stay at the edge of the band, not surging, not fading, just present. The city had been chasing an ending, but what she was seeing looked like a future, and it demanded a choice no one could take back. The boundary held for one night. Then the signature began to gather again. It drifted away from poor light districts and moved toward the last bright spine the city could not turn off. Raphael Knox called Celine back to the operations deck. The wall map showed 3 link nodes, Halcyon Medical Arc, the River Pump Junction, and Morrow Data Bastion itself. It is starving, Juno Revell said. It is choosing targets with continuous throughput. Maya Mercer stood near the door, recorder in hand. People are sleeping again. If you break that, they will riot. Raphael did not look away from the map. If we lose the pumps or the hospitals, there will be no city left to riot. Calder's channel clicked open, full of static. Umbra teams are in position. We can shield the nodes, but the optics will be blind. Raphael answered, then we do not fight with optics. He pushed a plan to every relay in the spine. The lamps did not go off all at once. They blinked in a strict rhythm, short dark cuts between narrow bursts, and the spectrum slid sideways with each burst so no single band stayed rich long enough to feed. Celine watched the drain plot tighten like a fist. The signature surged at the edges of each burst, then hesitated when the band changed, as if it had reached for a handle that was no longer there. It is angry, Maya said. It is hungry, Celine replied. There is a difference. She opened her own panel and brought up the neutral channel she had built in the lab. It was a thin band, steady and plain, with a pulse slow enough to feel like breathing. She aimed it at the boundary around the spine, not as bait, but as a fixed offer. The signature snapped toward it, brightening the plot in a sharp rise. Then it steadied at the edge, matching the pulse with a lag that shrank in real time. Juno leaned closer. It prefers continuity over impact. It is choosing not to crash the source. Raphael's jaw tightened. Or it is waiting for us to fail. Celine kept the channel steady while Raphael's rhythm cut and shifted around it. For a minute the city lived in two rules at once, defense in bursts, and a single calm line that did not change. Outside, sirens stayed quiet, and windows opened to air, as if the dark had become normal for now. On the hospital feed, lights flickered, but ventilators held. At the pump junction, pressure dipped, then recovered, as the bursts passed like controlled waves. The signature tested the spine twice, pushing toward the richer bands, then pulling back to the neutral line as if it understood the trade. Raphael finally exhaled. Hold the threshold. If it crosses, we cut deeper. Celine did not answer. She watched the plot settle into a plateau and realized the last fight was not about killing an enemy. It was about keeping a narrow promise without flinching long enough to make the next choice. Celine did not sleep that night, but she lay down anyway. She stared at the dim ceiling and listened to her own breathing until the urge to stand up passed. For the first time since Ansin began, she let her body remember what stopping felt like. At dawn she walked into the civic chamber with Priya Iwane's medical brief in one hand and Juno's stability graphs in the other. Raphael Knox was already there, uniform pressed, eyes tired, standing beside the city seal as if it were another weapon. Maya Mercer set her recorder on the table and did not speak. Her silence felt like permission. Celine placed the documents down and spoke without flourish. We cannot outfeed it, and we cannot outstarve it without starving ourselves. Raphael's gaze stayed on her. So what do you propose? Return sleep, Celine said, not as a personal choice. As a rule, we cap light, we narrow the bands, and we mandate dark windows. The brain needs darkness like the lungs need air. Priya nodded once. The symptoms will ease if the rhythm returns. Not overnight, but it will stop the damage. Raphael's jaw tightened. Defense will degrade. Our targeting, our surveillance. Celine did not deny it. Yes, we give up peak output. We trade dominance for continuity. We keep hospitals prioritized under a new standard, narrow and stable, and we stop letting private networks run rich bands. Juno slid a chart forward. When the bands stay poor and steady, the signature holds at the boundary. When they go rich, it surges. This is behavior tied to throughput. Maya finally spoke, voice low. And the price? Celine looked at the room and chose plain words. Shorter work cycles, slower recovery, fewer bright nights, a culture that stops worshipping productivity. Raphael turned to the window where the city lay in gray light. For a moment he looked like a man about to refuse, and Celine felt her pulse jump. Then he faced the table again. We call it the Light Covenant, Raphael said, not peace, a containment doctrine. Hospitals get stability, pumps get stability, everything else lives under caps and mandatory dark. Celine swallowed, and a reserved zone, a banded corridor at the edge of the grid. We give it a place where the neutral channel stays on. If it takes the offer, it stops hunting the spine. Raphael's voice stayed hard. If it does not take the offer, we cut deeper. Maya's recorder light blinked. People will hate this. They will survive it, Priya replied. Raphael signed first, pen scratching across the seal line. Celine signed next, hands steady despite the tremor in her chest. When Maya added her witness mark, the decision stopped being a plan and became a law. Outside, the grid schedule updated in real time. Lamps shifted to capped bands, and dark windows appeared on public screens like curfews for the mind. The city lost its promise of endless day, and in the same moment it regained the right to be human. The first real night felt unfamiliar, like wearing an old coat after months in uniform. Street lamps dimmed to capped bands. then went dark in scheduled windows. And people learned to trust the pause instead of fearing it. Apartments closed their blinds without shame. And the city sounded softer, as if even concrete could rest. Celine walked along the river after her shift, hands in her pockets, watching the pump lights blink on a narrow standard and then settle. She passed a clinic where Priya's staff were laying out cots for patients who needed supervision through their first full sleep cycle. No one cheered, they just moved carefully, like a society practicing a new habit. Raphael met her at the bridge rail. No escort, no radio chatter. The dim light made his face look less like an emblem and more like a tired man who had chosen something he could not fully defend in a briefing room. "We gave up the day," he said. Celine kept her eyes on the water. "We gave up the illusion. Day without sleep was never free." Raphael nodded once, accepting the correction. "People will blame us." "They can," Celine said. "At least they will be awake enough to mean it, and asleep enough to heal." For a moment neither of them spoke. In the dark window, the city's skyline disappeared in patches, and the absence looked almost gentle. Raphael turned slightly toward her. "When this ends, what do you do?" Celine thought of Evan and the sealed patch on her desk, then thought of the quiet wards that might finally stabilize. "I stop chasing forever. I build rules that let ordinary lives continue." Raphael's voice softened, "Just a fraction. Then we build them." Behind them, Juno's message came through on Celine's wrist display, flagged as low priority but urgent in tone. A new spectral trace had appeared on the outer monitoring ring, far beyond the reserved zone. It was faint, structured, and it did not match the city's signature exactly. It looked like another dialect of the same hunger, drifting along the planet's night side where no human grid existed. Celine stared at the trace until the screen dimmed. The light in the world was wider than their city, wider than their laws, and whatever lived in it did not belong to one place. She lifted her gaze to the dark sky and felt the strange comfort of limits. Eternal day had promised rescue, but it had only made them easier to break. The night, at last, offered something smaller and truer. In the end, we did not defeat the light. We learned to live inside its limits. And that choice brought something back that endless brightness never could. Rest, memory, and the quiet courage to stay human. Vanta Harbor dimmed on purpose, the city breathing in dark windows like a living thing. And for the first time in weeks, people stopped chasing forever and started rebuilding what lasts. If this story stayed with you, please hit like, share it with someone who loves thoughtful science fiction, and subscribe for more sci-fi audiobooks where the future feels real and every choice has a cost.